get some analysis now with Muhannad Ayyash, who's a professor of sociology at Mount Royal University. He joins us from Calgary, Canada. Welcome back to the program, Professor. As we continue to look at live pictures from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, we know that Israel has promised to release a total of 620 Palestinian prisoners in this latest exchange. Firstly, what's your reaction to what we're seeing now? Because, of course, the release of these prisoners was supposed to have taken place on Saturday.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Obviously, these are always very emotional moments for the Palestinian people. There's virtually not a Palestinian family anywhere in Palestine that hasn't had a direct experience with the brutality of Israeli prisons, whether it's family members or people themselves who have experienced imprisonment and or close friends. This is always a very emotional moment, and many of the freed Palestinians, as delighted as they are to be seeing their families and being out of these brutal conditions, let me tell you this right now, many of them, if not all of them, are thinking about all of the people still left languishing in Israeli prisons at the moment. Important to keep in mind that all of these prisoners are political prisoners. They are people who are simply standing up for the right to live a free, dignified life. And for that, they are punished brutally by the Israeli state. In terms of the bigger picture and the ceasefire and the negotiations to release that Hamas undertook to release some of these, all of these prisoners and address this delay, basically what's happening at the moment is that the Israeli state, supported and backed by the Trump administration, is trying to extend as long as possible phase one so that they don't have to get into discussions and negotiations about phase two, where you get into the really important parts of the ceasefire agreement, which is a permanent ceasefire and serious discussions about the future of the Gaza Strip. So these kinds of delays are being used by the Israelis to try to buy time and extend this phase one. And their goal ultimately is to get all of their hostages back while they continue with their plan to destroy Gaza and continue to terrorize Palestinian communities in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
Now, we know in this latest exchange a total of 620 Palestinian detainees are supposed to be released. And as we heard there from our correspondent, some of them have been detained for more than a decade, while many others were captured by Israeli authorities from Gaza over the last 16 months during the Gaza war. You say that all of these prisoners are essentially political prisoners. So in your view, have they really just been abducted and used as bargaining chips?
Absolutely. And Israel will abduct more Palestinians tomorrow. They released 620 today. Who knows how many they will take tomorrow. This has been a continuous system and structure of imprisonment of the Palestinian people for decades. This is not new. The numbers go up and down in terms, so things change in terms of the scope, how many people are being arrested, and in terms of the intensity of the violence being committed against Palestinians. You know, Palestinian prisoners from the 1960s and 70s and even 80s will tell you that things are way worse today than they were back then, as bad as they were back then. And believe me, they were brutal back then too. Things like that change over time. Sometimes the treatment is way worse, as it has been over the last 16, 17 months since October 2023. The treatment of Palestinian prisoners has escalated into a very brutal form. And Israel basically just rounds up people for anything. It could be something as simple as attending a demonstration or organizing with your local members of the community to build, self-sufficient communities that would be economically independent of Israel. Social media activities and so on. there's really, Israel does not need, nor does it practice any kind of due process to arrest Palestinians, to throw them in these brutal conditions. It is an abduction. It is taking hostages. They just do it on a much more mass scale and over a continuous period of time, and they call it, they call it a sort of official and legitimate because it is being done by the state. But most of these Palestinians have not had any real justice, have not been, rightly convicted of crimes or anything like that. This is just another tool that Israel uses to suppress Palestinian resistance to Israeli settler colonialism and make life impossible for Palestinians.
And Professor, if this latest exchange goes according to plan, it would mark the final exchange of Israeli captives and Palestinian prisoners as stipulated under the first phase of this ceasefire agreement. Earlier, you expressed your doubts as to whether we'll see a second phase actually take place in a timely fashion. Of course, the second phase of the agreement calls for the release of all remaining Israeli captives, as well as the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Do you think that will ever be a reality?
I mean, one hopes that that will be a reality, but certainly the Israelis don't want that to be the reality. Unless I missed breaking news while I was teaching today, they haven't even begun the negotiations for phase two. That was supposed to happen a little while ago now, at least 2 weeks ago. As far as I know, this hasn't even begun yet. It shows you that they're not being serious. They're not interested in a phase two. Netanyahu has said multiple times, we'll never reach phase two. He's assured his right-wing ministers, extreme right-wing ministers, they're all right-wings in the Israeli government, basically. He's assured them that the war will continue. Don't worry. The ceasefire is not real. It's not going to hold. I don't see any reason for anybody to take Israel as at its word, or suspect that they would be in any scenario serious about these negotiations. Now, does that mean that Israel just gets everything it wants all the time? Unfortunately, that does happen way too often, but we need this moment where the international community says to Israel and to the US, enough is enough. You cannot go back to your genocidal operation in Gaza. You're going to have to make some compromises and reach an agreement that would lead to a permanent ceasefire, the full withdrawal of all Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. These things, you have to force them on Israel. They will not do them on their own accord. They have to be pressured to do that. And this is where really the only hope lies. If you're asking me to predict what's going to happen, it's always a tricky game to predict. All I can do is tell you what Israel wants to happen. I can tell you what the Palestinians want to happen, and then it's up to the international community and members of the entire world, people around the world, to ensure that something happens that will stop this genocide of the Palestinian people, not just in Gaza, not just in the West Bank in this particular historical juncture, but for the long term as well. And for that to happen, only pressure, economic pressure on Israel can work. So I keep going back to that point because ultimately that is what is needed. There are, a lot of dynamics at play at the moment that makes it difficult for us to know when and if phase two happens, but we do know that there are many, many obstacles standing in its way, and all of those obstacles come from Israel and the US.
Okay, Professor Muhannad Ayyash, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.